Okay, we're live, guys. Thank you very much. I see a lot of people in the live chat already waiting for us. So thank you for waiting. Thank you for joining me. Thank you to everybody who's going to be watching this or listening to this later as well. I really, really appreciate everybody being here. So obviously the U.S. elections happened, and we talked about it. I talked about it on the show before with a couple of people from India who have, who followed the United States politics quite closely. And I thought this week it'd be a good idea to get someone from the United States who've been following the elections and what's going on in there closely. So help me welcome back to the show, Brad Polumbo. Brad, welcome back.
Hey man, thanks for having me back.
Yeah, for sure. It was really fun doing it the first time around, and I was hoping to get you back on the show sometime. So this seems like as good of a moment as any. So let me get started from sort of the very beginning and what's going on there. So with one of the big talking points out of this election obviously has been Trump and his campaign's claims of this widespread conspiracy of voter fraud. Now, I am not discounting that there was some small scale voter fraud in various places. There's been evidence of that in the past elections as well. But do you buy the idea of this large scale voter fraud conspiracy on the part of the Democrats in the country?
Well, I don't, for a couple of reasons. First and foremost is that this election was actually a great election for Republicans. In both the House and the Senate, Republicans vastly overperformed. Even Trump overperformed by a lot compared to what the polls said. He got more minority voters, more Hispanic voters, more African-American voters, more women voters than last time. And he ended up taking a lot of states that he was projected to lose in. So the idea that there would be a mass fraud conspiracy, but they would only do it at the top of the ticket, and they wouldn't do it for all the down ballot races in Congress and the Senate, and they would still let Trump do a lot better than polls said he would, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Now, don't get me wrong, like there is voter fraud. That is a thing. And I'm sure that they will produce some evidence of voter fraud here or there, but you would have to produce enough evidence of voter fraud that you would swing the votes in like 4 states at this point. And in each state, it would require tens of thousands of fraudulent votes. And not only that, you'd have to prove that every single one of those fraudulent votes was in favor of Biden and against Trump, when some of them might be pro-Trump fraud votes. Who knows? So it's just, look, he is entitled to a recount. He is entitled to take any case to court. But I'm operating under the assumption that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are going to take power until he can prove definitively that there was such wide-scale funny business that it actually could have swung the result. And I just don't think that's going to happen, to be honest.
Yeah, and that whole discussion that you were talking about how Trump overperformed in a lot of places as compared to what the polls were saying, and how Republicans did really well in Senate races and House races than they were supposed to. It presents an interesting question that it does seem like people were kind of a little bit sick of Trump as a personality, but not necessarily Trumpism, if you know what that means.
Right.
Like not necessarily Trump's policies, not necessarily Trump's brand of populism, but it was more the repudiation of Trump as a personality. Would you agree with that assessment?
I would agree, because if you look at polling, actually, even despite a global pandemic, more than 50% of Americans say they're better off today than they were 4 years ago. And that's generally, that polling metric is used as kind of a proxy for, are you happy with the governance? And people really do like the kind of Trump agenda and the Trump results, particularly prior to the coronavirus. Things were really strong. But his personality and the constant fighting and name calling and conspiracies and tweeting, it's fatiguing, man. I found it exhausting as a journalist, and I support a lot of the stuff that he's done on the policy front, but this dude's constantly giving headaches for us, headaches for himself. And I think there's a large number of people that after the coronavirus crisis happened, they decided that we can't have someone erratic like this in there right now, even though we like his agenda. And on the flip side, the Democrats, their agenda is very unpopular. I mean, they've had you and I were talking about this before we went live, but they had this post election call with all the Democrats in Congress. And after they lost big, they were supposed to pick up seats in the House, and they lost a bunch. They'll still have a slim majority, and then they're probably going to they're not going to take the Senate. Republicans will keep the Senate. So the Democrats were like, crap, what happened? And somebody got on there and said, defund the police almost cost me my race. Stop these crazy slogans. Stop saying socialism. Never say socialism again. And it's like, listen, when you allow your party to become the party of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and her far left crazy ideas, and every Democrat primary candidate practically supported the Green New Deal. So it's like, when you allow those people to take the show, you have to expect that that's going to backfire in parts of the country outside of California and New York City. And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, and it does really look like there's sort of like a rift forming within the Democratic Party, and that rift has sort of been masked a little bit with Biden winning the presidency. But in the next few months or in the next year or so, I think that rift's going to become a little bit more prominent. And there's this rift between people like a Biden, who people generally in the United States tend to like, and it was more of a vote for Biden and normalcy and decency and against the sort of personality of Trump. So you have centrists like Biden and people like Jim Clyburn and Spanberger, who's on that call as well. And then you have the other side, which is Kamala Harris, who's been, pretty desperate to ingratiate herself to the squad, which means that if there's a presidency or if there's an administration where Kamala Harris has influence, which means that the squad is eventually going to have influence. So it seems to be that rift in the Democratic Party that's going to be very interesting to see if at all Biden's going to be able to manage that or not, because, and it kind of brings me, so I want to talk about Kamala a little bit later, but let's talk about Biden. So in a Biden presidency, like, what are we expecting? What does a return to normalcy, as Biden kept saying, what does a return to decency, normalcy, what does that translate policy-wise? Because that sounds wonderful, but what does it mean in terms of policy? What do you think are Biden's key policies that he's going to be looking to implement in his first term?
So I'm glad you brought up the riff, because the riff really speaks to this question.
Right.
Because what happened is that left-wingers and then center-left kind of people like Biden versus left-wingers like AOC, they were all united by hating Trump, by wanting to beat Trump.
Right.
Now, if Trump is out of the picture, which looks like it's probably what's going to happen, then all of a sudden they have to deal with these crazy radicals among them who control, the media and control the millions of Democratic voters in the base who are radical. Yet they also have to deal with their constituency of a lot of minorities who are more moderate, more working class, who don't want socialism, don't want the police defunded. They want more police in their neighborhoods, actually, according to polling.
And like voting patterns that you saw for Trump, and like the number of minorities that voted for Trump, that should be a cause for concern for the Democratic Party too.
Yes, I mean, think about it. Trump has said some sus stuff on racial issues. Yeah. He has really put his foot in his mouth sometimes on that stuff. Yet even he peeled off tons of African-American and Hispanic voters. I think with Trump out of the picture, that's only even going to accelerate, because the Democrats are going to have to actually govern, and they're going to go far to the left as much as they can. Thankfully, a Republican Senate will mean they can't pass sweeping climate legislation. They can't pass massive tax hikes. They can't pass packing the Supreme Court. They can't pass gun control and confiscating weapons from law-abiding Americans. They can't pass a government takeover of healthcare via a public option that will drive private insurance out of business. Those are all the things that Biden wants to do, and Kamala getting on board, she has even more ambitious plans. I mean, she ran on 20 times as much new government spending in her primary campaign, Kamala Harris, as Hillary Clinton did in 2016. Whoa. 20 times as much, more radical, more big government, more spending, closer to socialism. So she has shown herself fully willing to go to the far left if that's what will get her power. And I just think we'll have to see which force prevails in a Biden-Harris administration. But I have to say, I expect Harris to be certainly very influential, if not calling the shots completely.
It does, right? And it makes sense to me that Harris is someone that will be more influential, simply because of the way she was picked in the first place, because Biden had to pretty much come out in the beginning and say, look, guys, I'm going to be picking a woman. Come what may, I'm going to be picking a woman. 2 months later, he was like, guys, look, I'm going to be picking a woman of color, right? So that takes out pretty much 70 to 80% of the other candidates out of the picture right away. Like you have somebody like an Amy Klobuchar, for example, who
She would have been so much better.
Pretty good, moderate Democratic candidate, somebody from Midwestern battleground states, could have done better there. Somebody who has more governing experience, somebody who's a lot more palatable to sort of middle America than somebody like a Kamala Harris, but she never really stood in chance, did she?
No, she was white, and that's the problem with this identity politics, is that Kamala Harris was a failed candidate. She's never won any election outside of California, which is just default a Democrat win. And so she ran a failed primary campaign where she had the glowing endorsements and coverage of the whole media, basically, but she crashed out before her home state and barely won a single delegate, I think. So she really failed on that front.
Let's
and
also remember who ate her for breakfast on that debate stage.
And Tulsi Gabbard wrecked her. So she has all this baggage from when she locked up innocent people as a prosecutor and laughed about it, which, not great. But Kamala had all of this, and yet she's still kind of, even despite failing upward, that's what I think she has done. She has failed up and up and up. And the only reason she has done that, if we're just being honest and we're not being politically correct, is because she is a minority and she is a woman. If she was a white man and had her same record and everything, no way on earth would she be Joe Biden's vice president. And listen, that is not progress. That is tokenism. That is offensive, I think, right? Like I would not, obviously I am not black and I'm not a woman and I'm not of Indian heritage, but I would not want the pioneer for my people to be a token pick who never would have gotten there on their own merits. I think that's reductionist. I think that's kind of insulting.
It is. It really is. And so you have, on the one hand, you have somebody who I think you can make a very good case did not deserve it. I think you can make a very good case. And that's something that I got from some of the people that I spoke to here around where I live as well. It was like, I don't really have a problem against Kamala Harris, but I have a problem against Kamala Harris leapfrogging all of those candidates who are ostensibly a lot more deserving than her. I have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with her necessarily becoming a president, or a black woman or a woman of Indian heritage becoming a president or anything like that, or a vice president. I just have a problem with how she got there in the first place. And I think that's a very valid point. And because now this is someone that is in the vice presidency, it clearly shows that by picking her, Joe Biden had to give a lot of leeway to a certain section within his party. I think it only goes to show that that section of the party is going to have a fair amount of influence in Biden presidency. And I'm talking here, of course, about the sort of more social justice oriented wing of the party, the squad, who, like we were talking about earlier, that Kamala Harris really wants to ingratiate herself. She really wants to get into that club. She's been dying to get into that club for a while now, and this is her opportunity to do it, right?
Right. I think it is. And she will be pushing for that inside the administration. And look, I wish Joe Biden good health, and I don't wish him anything bad if he's going to be the next president of the United States. But it is not guaranteed that this dude will make it 4 years. I mean, he's really old. He's kind of frail, and I hope to God he's okay. But I mean, she could become president before the 4 years is over. More importantly, he could still be president, but kind of be shifted to the back of the room in a way that actually historically in Ronald Reagan's second term, he started to suffer from mental decline, and he kind of outsourced it to a lot of his cabinet and to his vice president. That's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, that just is kind of how it works. But with Kamala, it's a bad thing because she's going to come in there and say, time to get to work, boys. I've been waiting for this my whole life. And she's going to come in and take power. And what she would do with it is frightening, frankly, because she's run on a draconian far left agenda at times. And then sometimes she's kind of pivoted and more moderate and flip-flop back and forth. But what that really shows you is like, listen, I disagree with Bernie Sanders about just everything, frankly, almost everything. But that dude's got principles and he's got beliefs. He's not just power hungry and ambitious. Kamala Harris supported Medicare for all, wrote the bill in the Senate, and then ran for president and said, actually, wait, I don't support this anymore. Right? She has no principle other than wanting power and wanting to use it to punish her enemies. And like you mentioned, AOC and the squad, AOC is starting to keep
They're all about punishing their enemies, aren't they?
Right. They're starting, some of these left-wing people are starting to post on Twitter and write about this and say, we're making lists of all the Trump enablers and they'll never work again, or they should never be hired after their complicity. And I'm like, listen.
I don't think they understand. Like, I don't know if they understand what this. I kind of feel like they do understand what they're saying, because that's crazy talk, man. Like, that's crazy talk to talk that way in a democracy, that just because somebody voted or supported a guy you did not like, that means they should be kicked out of their houses. They should never be able to find work again. They should live on the streets, and they should prostrate before the God Queen of the social justice warriors, AOC. Like,
beg
what
for
is that
forgiveness.
kind of talk, dude? Yeah. That's
crazy. It's crazy. And listen to this too. It's not even just the famous Trump people like cabinet or anything like this that they're going after. There's this group called the Lincoln Project. And these are these they used to be conservative, like Bush Republicans, but now they've just gone full anti-Trump all the time, deranged, pro-Biden, totally left-wing. They've started doxing from their main Twitter page with 3 million followers random people that work in the Trump administration or work for the Trump administration's law firm they've contracted for election-related lawsuits, posting their email addresses, their names. These aren't famous people, their phone numbers, and telling people to just bombard them with harassment. And we're not talking about like his Secretary of State, and you could maybe argue like it's just democracy holding them accountable. We're talking about like a junior legal associate on a random team here that they contracted and just harass this random person, everybody. Like, this is some nightmarish stuff, and they don't want to play this game, because I don't support doing this to anyone. But if you start doing this, don't expect the other side to not do it back when it's their turn.
Yep. And that's exactly right. And I was thinking to myself, on that thing as well, that I was reading the comments under AOC's post and under that Lincoln Project post as well. And an uncomfortable amount of people are okay with this, are thinking that this is something that should be done. And I'm thinking to myself, if, a lot of immigrant families, minority families in the United States that live in the United States have come from countries where at some point in time, things like this have happened to their people. And I'm thinking to myself, if I'm an immigrant who's come from Cuba, if I'm an immigrant who's come from the Middle East, from like a country like Egypt, where these kinds of things were off on the coast, I'm looking at what AOC is doing and I'm thinking, I don't want this. I don't want any part of this. So for a party and for a group of people that ostensibly seek to be speaking for the minority, for the downtrodden minority in America, I think this kind of behavior will just distance them from this group of the Democratic Party.
It's already happening. I mean, in the election, what were the two groups of Hispanic? You can't just say Hispanic voters. There's so much diversity within the Hispanic community. Right. The two groups that ran away from the Democrats and voted for Trump, Venezuelans and Cuban Americans. So I wonder why that is. Exactly. It's because they've seen socialism, they've seen authoritarianism, and they recognize it in the smiling face of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and of Kamala Harris. Look, I think I said this multiple times during the Trump administration. He tweets way too much about the media and about journalists, and he should not say they're the enemy of the people, as biased as they may be. He has a lot of anti-media rhetoric. But his administration didn't have any anti-media actions. And if you remember Obama, his administration actually targeted journalists for imprisonment, including a Fox News journalist. And that was he only did that on a few occasions. But I'm saying, I think that Kamala Harris is the type who won't have the ugly rhetoric of Trump about the media. She won't have kind of unhinged 2 a.m. tweets about Jim Acosta and CNN. Right. Yeah. But she might quietly crack down with the weight of the government. And frankly, that scares me much more.
Yeah, so let's look at some, policies proper. Let's get into Biden-Kamala Harris policies proper. So, some of Biden's policies, he's created his transition website where he's talking about one of the first things that he's going to be doing is getting back into the Paris Accord. He's going to be rejoining the WHO. He's going to be helping with DACA. And, those are projects, policies that I think more or less people could get on board, more or less people can agree with. Then it comes to another part of his transition website is he's talking about racial equality, where things get a little bit more interesting. One of the things that he mentioned in his website is equalizing federal procurement, which means, kind of provisions of contracting opportunities that will be provided to minority businesses more than other businesses. And I can see that's where some issues might start developing, right? But still, I can see people getting on board with it. So, but then it comes to some of the other policies that will definitely be pushed by Kamala Harris as she gains more and more influence in this administration. And like you said, right, Brad, that she's willing to say exactly what certain people in certain situations want to hear to get to that power. And once she gets to that power, that's when she begins to gain control. Because remember, we're all old enough to remember that just a little while ago, she basically insinuated that Joe Biden might be a sexual predator and that he might be a segregationist and a racist. That was not.
She literally called him racist.
Right.
Yeah, I mean,
that was not a very long time ago, and now they're best buddies.
It was on national TV.
Right. So, I mean, that shows you a flip-flopper, if any. And one of the, so we're going to come to, I want to kind of finish up with the identity politics stuff a little bit later, but let's jump into the policies. Like if you look at Kamala Harris's voting record, I remember there was some group that was analyzing her voting record, and they were talking that she like even more liberal in her voting record than somebody like Elizabeth Warren, who we thought was like right up there. And I think you mentioned it, or maybe we can start with this. We could talk about the Green New Deal. We can start with that. That's something that AOC and the Sunshine Project have really been behind, and something that Kamala Harris has also jumped on, and a lot of other people in the primaries that jumped on right from the very beginning. And if you really start going through that plan, the more you go through that plan, the more uncomfortable it makes you, if you know what I mean, because the plan sort of outright completely discounts any attempts to incentivize the private sector towards more green policies, because it has an agenda that this is the time frame in which we want to go to completely green. And there are going to be no incentives. We're not going to give people incentives because it's too slow. What we're going to do is we're going to force people to do what we want them to do. And I feel like, if I know the American people to an extent by now, American people do not want to be forced to do anything they do not want to do.
Right.
And, yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think you're right about the Green New Deal. The Green New Deal, I have to tell you, I've gone back and looked at this comparison. The Green New Deal, it reads very similarly to the Soviet Union Bill of Workers' Rights,
right?
That promised everyone the government will secure housing for all, healthcare for all, fair wages for all. And it's all, of course, the government, grow our own power. It's funny, actually, an AOC staffer has since admitted off the cuff that the Green New Deal is not about climate change. It's about reorganizing and restructuring and controlling the economy. So it's not about climate change. I think climate change is a problem. I think there are ways we can address it, particularly nuclear power and other free market solutions can lead the way. But it doesn't even have nuclear power in the Green New Deal anywhere. It has all just command and control, government restrictions and mandates. And look, Kamala Harris co-sponsored that radical plan. And then she also, like I mentioned, ran on 40 times or 20 times more spending than Clinton. She ran on national rent control policies. Basically, I've gone through her record at length in columns and analyses. And on every issue, her solution is more government, more taxpayer money, more exercise of state authority, and conveniently, that all means more power for Kamala Harris. So I think there's just no solution. There's no area in American life where she would say, actually, the government should do less. You know, with honest progressives like Bernie Sanders or Tulsi Gabbard, they want the government to do more on healthcare and more on labor. And I don't agree with them, and we can debate that. But on other issues like criminal justice or like nation building, foreign policy, they say, okay, the government should do less. So they're actually open to not always just wanting more and more government and more power, right? They're actually looking at it issue. On Kamala Harris's side, literally on every issue, her answer is more power for herself and via the government. So I think that tells you a lot about the kind of vice president she will be.
Yeah, and another thing, you know, obviously is the sort of power grab of it, aspect of it. The other aspect of programs like the Green New Deal is the sheer cost that it's going to impose on the people. You know, the Green New Deal sort of, I remember it contains a proposal for universal healthcare and a basic, I think, minimum income program to make up for all the jobs that were lost in the process of transitioning to a fully green economy, like it lines out in the deal. And AOC, I remember talking about supporting how are you going to pay for the Green New Deal if you're gonna need such a massive outlay of cash for it. And she said she suggested taxes being as high as 70% on the top income earners. So you're looking at a incredibly large monetary cost on the taxpayer as well.
Well, and so she did suggest that, but that's not it. Like, that couldn't cut it. You could confiscate all the wealth held by the 1%, and it wouldn't come even close to covering the full cost of the Green New Deal. Wow. So, I mean, that's kind of a talking point that they push. We'll pay for it with taxes on the rich. That's just not realistic in the slightest. They're going to raise taxes on everybody. You know, if we want to talk about Sweden or Denmark or places that have a lot of this stuff, we can talk about them as examples, though they're not really examples. A lot of the stuff Bernie and AOC propose is actually far to the left of those countries. But in those countries, everybody pays 50, 60, 45% tax rates, depending on the country. But like, I'm talking about your working class Joes. Right. So it's not just a tax the rich only situation. That's a total myth. And part of the way they sell that myth is by just focusing on like nominal taxation. But just who you put a tax on is not necessarily the person that bears the cost of it. So when you put big punitive taxes on corporations, people might think, oh, that just means Jeff Bezos will make less money. Who cares? Well, no, I mean, they take that out of wages and they raise prices on consumption and consumers. So, and economic studies show it's mostly borne by those two fronts and not borne by, you know, corporate earnings. So that's how they pull that sleight of hand. And they also are just dishonest about it. They just say, we'll just tax the rich when the math doesn't add up, and no one calls them on it because the media wants them to be elected. So that is unfortunate, but that is where we're at. The good news is it really looks likely Republicans will hold the Senate. And if not, it will be just like razor thin Democrat. And there's no way they'll get this crazy stuff passed through there because even the moderate Democrats in the Senate won't go along with it. And they would need a majority. The other thing, too, is that they might try to push a lot of this agenda through the federal government regulatory state. Like, they might say, oh, we can't get it through Congress. I'll just write executive orders. Actually, Kamala Harris, this was one of the most disturbing parts of her entire presidential campaign. She was talking about gun control on a presidential debate stage. And she said, I'll give Congress 100 days to pass my bill. And if they don't, I'll just write the executive order and do it without them.
Dude, there's going to be a Ruby Ridge in every state if they do that.
Well, and listen to this, too. Joe Biden looked at her on the debate stage and said, you can't do that, the Constitution. And she laughed at him. She said, ha, 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 ha. Oh, Joe. Yes,
I'm your Constitution now. Yeah.
I'm like, so she just laughs off the literal Constitution and checks and balances and separation of government, like LOL, as if that can stop me. So I'm pretty concerned to see what she'll do if the Senate roadblocks. I mean, the Senate is literally built into the Constitution to be a check on the president. So they can't just do whatever they want. Yet I'll be interested to see what Biden-Harris does when the Senate says, no, you can't do that. Are they just going to try to ram it all through the executive? Maybe, but that's why it's good that we're going to have a conservative majority Supreme Court.
Yeah. And one of the things that I've sort of noticed is that among the younger, millennial population, Gen Z population, there does seem to be a decent amount of support for these progressive, if not the politicians, then definitely the progressive policies. And, a lot of people, like if you look at Pew released a couple of researchers, I remember, where they were talking about Americans in general believe that income inequality has increased and that they're not doing as well as their parents or the generation before them were doing necessarily. And even if that's not completely accurate, but based on sort of people's beliefs, does that also make you think that these progressive politicians are not just going to go away if another Republican government comes in?
Yeah, they're not going to go away because they're doing something on the Democrat side that's working, and they're tapping into something real. I mean, AOC might be wrong about just about everything, but she is an excellent communicator. She is excellent at reaching young people on Instagram, and she has tapped into something very real. And I think that while her ideas and her solutions are almost always wrong and frankly extreme, what has happened is that the right has failed in the last several decades to really pitch in a persuadable way or palatable way to young people at all on the biggest issues that young people care about, like college and the higher education and climate change and the economy and jobs. They don't even pretend to care about the things. They'll just say, oh, climate change, Chinese hoax. First off, if you believe that's not true. But even if you do believe that, that's not what young voters think. So you got to win them over and come up with something better than that. And so they've also, I think, and this is evolving and improving, but historically, Republicans have allowed themselves to be viewed by young people as the bigots, right? And it really rules out a lot of young people when they associate with the GOP or with conservatism, anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim, anti-LGBT, anti-women. They associate all this stuff. And part of the reason they associate that is because of constant bad faith media coverage and narratives and some all-out smears and distortions. But part of it is also because Republicans don't do enough to appeal to those groups and to promote their own diversity, not through tokenism, but through just openness to different groups of people, and to really make sure that they're not associated with that. Because young people aren't necessarily leftists on the inside, but they are overwhelmingly supportive of kind of leftism because they don't really feel, most of them don't really feel like there's an alternative.
Yeah, like we talked about it, remember on the last podcast, we talked about this on the last podcast, that a lot of the younger people, they might not even know the Black Lives Matter leadership, might not even know what the Black Lives Matter leadership stands for, but they just support the idea of Black Lives Matter. There's a difference between the two. And I think sometimes conservatives get that mixed up.
Conservatives like to just go for the easy slam dunk and say, haha, Black Lives Matter is Marxists. And they're like technically right. The people who run the official organization are Marxists, but that ignores the fact that, like you said, there's millions of young people who care about Black Lives Matter just as a movement, just like we want police reform. They're not necessarily Marxists, but if you just write them off as communists, you're not going to convince them with that. And look, I am hoping that part of this can change as Trump leaves the picture, because Trump has his merits, but he is a uniquely divisive and unpopular figure among young people.
Right.
And so one of the arguments that kind of conservatives who opposed Trump in 2016 and 15 made was that he will damage the future of our party with young voters, and that will stay with them over the years. And that doesn't have to come true, but it will come true if there's not some kind of damage control of, okay, well, we've got our base, they like our policies, but we have to grow our tent and include more young people. And that it will involve shifting on tone and substance in some key areas. And I think somebody like Nikki Haley could do that, Whereas I don't think Trump is what he is. He's never going to change. And if you try to change him, you're setting yourself up for disaster.
So do you think that was going to be my next question. In who do you see as someone that can maybe retain parts of Trump's populism, but then also sort of be able to reach across the aisle a little bit better than Trump was ever able to in his 4 years? Do you think Nikki Haley is somebody like that?
Yeah, she comes to mind immediately.
Okay.
I think if Nikki Haley was the nominee, she would have done just as well or almost as well as Trump in with the Latino voters, with the African American voters, and a lot of that. But I also think she would have done a lot better with women voters, and that's where Trump really bleeds low support, is with women and suburban women. And if the GOP could keep this expanded working class and minority coalition, but also bring back minority suburban women, they would have a majority by a wide margin. And I think somebody like Nikki Haley could do that. Because she is a politician. She can be flexible on some of her positions and be a little more populist and Trumpy. Right. But at the same time, the establishment and the old guard will like her and say she's one of us. And she did work with Trump, and she has backed him, so she can get the Trump crowd. And then also, she's more socially moderate. So I think she would get even higher support from the LGBT community. Trump got crazy high support this time, more than doubled from 2016. But even he was really painted as controversial more than he actually was on those issues. But she would be much more kind of palatable to that. And I think she could really lead a modern Republican Party in a direction where it could have a majority coalition again.
With the younger population, with the millennials and the Gen Zers that you see have these relatively more sanguine attitude towards socialist policies or these progressive policies, do you see that as a long-term trend, like 20 years from now, when these Gen Zers and these millennials are sort of in their 40s and their 50s, the prime voting age and the prime voting population? Do you foresee a future where like these progressive policies sort of become the tent pole of a particular party, or they become real issues that parties are going to fight over as something that even Republicans might need to start taking seriously?
I hope not. I think that could happen, and it's all going to happen. It's going to depend on a few things. Hopefully, they'll be mugged by reality, as we put it. So listen, I'm a young guy myself in my early 20s, and it was not too long ago that I got my first pay stub as a full-time employee and saw how much money they're taking out in taxes. A crazy amount here in Washington, D.C. area. So I was already red-pilled at that point, but I was like, okay, I'm an anarchist now. Burn it all down, destroy the whole... No, I'm kidding. But you get my point, right? Yeah. And it's easy to support socialism when it's just on an AOC Instagram story and in your college dorm room conversations. Yeah. It's harder when you have a real job and you're out there working and producing and you're in the economy. And a lot of people will hopefully kind of come to evolve at least more moderation on that over time. But then it's also on us. Unfortunately, basic economics are not taught anywhere in American education. And the American populace has extremely low understanding of most basic economic principles or most basic principles of government. And because if more people understood them, they would see why socialism is disastrous and doomed to fail. But they don't, and that's partly on us. That's partly on kind of conservative commentators and Republican politicians and scholars and media. And that's our job, is to sell those ideas and promote that information. Because if we don't, then they're going to stay on the left by default.
And it's interesting, right? There's a book, I can't remember who the authors are, but it's called Coddling of the American Mind. It was pretty popular for a couple of years. And I think it was Jonathan Haidt that was one of the authors of it. But he was talking about, how faculty in a lot of these premier colleges, in fact, pretty much all across America, most of them lean pretty heavily left. Most of them lean pretty heavily towards the identity politics, sort of SJW, what is whiteness and how we must fight it kind of crowd, right? And so that's another thing that needs to be addressed maybe by the other side of the aisle as to how do we combat these ideas that are so firmly entrenched by through somewhere or another in the university setup. So anybody that's going to university is completely and utterly inundated with these left-wing ideas. And, it's pretty hard to come out of that education and those 4 years without having that idea firmly lodged into your brain.
It is. It really is. But how do you solve that? I don't really know. Because conservatives have largely just ceded the university system to the left. And, it was funny because I've been talking about the craziness on campuses for a couple years now, several years now, honestly, the last half decade. And people would say, come on, it's just college campuses. It's not a big issue. But now you see that the woke kind of far left identity politics has gone from the college classrooms to the corporate boardrooms, to the media of the highest levels like the New York Times. The New York Times published an op-ed by a Republican senator, and the staff revolted and said, this idea puts Black lives in danger, even though like 35 or 40% of Black people actually polling shows agreed with the argument expressed that we needed military to shut down.
Every day there's like a protest at Spotify, people trying to get rid of Joe Rogan's podcast.
It's crazy, but that shows you the crazy, insane ideology of the woke campus left has not stayed on campus. It has gone with these people to media, to technology, to government. Critical race theory, until President Trump signed an executive order, was being taught with taxpayer dollars to federal government agencies about, like you said, like what is whiteness and how white people are evil, by Robin DiAngelo, author of White Fragility. This is some like pseudoscience, scientific, like racist, reductive, crazy worldview, and it's literally in the taxpayer-financed education seminars.
I don't understand who told liberal white people that self-loathing is the best way to help minorities.
I'm the way you avoid the mob, though.
Right.
You only avoid the mob if you're willing to admit that you're racist and genuflect before them. And then if you say you're not racist, according to Robin DiAngelo, that's proof of your racism and you're in denial. So you can't win. You got to just bend to the mob and hope for the best.
Exactly. And that's a real trick, I think, for I think, not even conservatives, but just people that don't consider themselves like woke, left, crazy, that don't consider themselves that. It's gonna be tricky for them to take back those college campuses to an extent, because from top to bottom the faculty is packed with them. So how do you get any other idea than wokeness is a virtue in there? That's going to be real tricky. I'm not sure how to achieve that either.
I have a few ideas on that. One would be that fewer people should go to college, frankly. College has become so crazy expensive, and you go in and you study gender studies or philosophy, and then you're a barista at Starbucks. It really is true that for a lot of people, college is not a good investment anymore. And I wrote an article a few weeks ago about this, actually. There's this rise of internship or apprenticeship kind of job skills programs as college alternatives. So like Google is now doing something where they are taking people straight after high school, training them for I think 2 semesters or something like that. And then boom, they get a high paying software development job. That won't come with the ideology. It won't come with the safe spaces, maybe a little bit, but a lot less. And you know what? They'll be much more productive members of society, frankly, than most gender studies and poetry majors are. So one thing we can do is just promote that and revisit this narrative that every kid's got to go to college. It depends on what you want to do. I wanted to study economics, and I'm going to probably pursue a master's in it at some point. But if I just wanted to do, normal life, I shouldn't need a bachelor's in some random thing to go and do a job that doesn't actually have anything to do with that thing. And that's what most Americans do these days. And that just makes no sense. So we should be revisiting that entire system, frankly.
That's true. That is true. That's one way to go about it. I don't know. It's another thing, because like these college administrations need to come to an understanding that what we have been teaching our children, we may agree with it. They may agree with what they've been teaching. They may agree with what the faculty say, but at the same time, they need to come to an understanding that there is a great amount of physical and racial diversity in these college campuses, but there's pretty much no diversity in terms of ideas, no diversity in
Pretty
terms of
minimal.
what these students are being exposed to. And whatever diversity has been, people have attempted to introduce that diversity of ideas. In a lot of places, we've seen that there's been a very, very adverse reaction to it. Like people have, shouted them down, the heckler's veto, as they say. And I think these administrators need to understand that. I think it would need to be like a combination of both those things, right? More people realizing that they maybe don't need to go to college, and then administrators being like, maybe we need to be a little bit more inclusive in terms of diversity of ideas if we need to attract more people back to the colleges. So I think it might need to be like a combination of both, you know what I mean?
I agree, but it's like universities, as distorted as they may be, are still sort of a market. So if you vote with your dollars, and so basically if the populace at large were to say, we're going to start really sending our kids to schools that have more diversity of thought and less kind of dominance of woke insanity. And I don't think there should be I think all ideas should be presented. So I'm okay with having Marxist professors and insane left-wing professors. We just also should have right-wing professors and free market capitalist professors to balance it out. But if parents and families and young people started to vote with their dollars and their choices, schools would have to adapt. But right now, partly because college is so expensive and people often don't have a ton of options or flexibility, they can't really do that, or at least they don't do it very much. And that is limiting to the ability of a feedback mechanism to address this problem.
Yeah, very finally, what do you, with the Democratic Party, we've already spoken about what we can possibly expect. But with the Republican Party, what do you expect to happen in the next 4 years leading up to 2024? Because in 2016, it was kind of an anomaly where this guy comes in and just sort of blows everything to smithereens, And the Republican Party didn't really know what hit them. He just comes in, pretty much captures their base, and the Republican Party has to just go with it.
Right.
Now that guy is gone, that personality is gone, and what does the Republican Party now do? Do they go back to those sort of conservative, interventionist sort of ideals that they used to have, or they go back to embracing a little bit of Trump's populism and then bringing back those old conservative GOP values that they have? Like, how do they navigate this Biden presidency?
So honestly, it's a jump ball. What it is going to be in the 2024 presidential primary, you're going to have candidates running on different versions of what direction should it be. You probably will have somebody, maybe Donald Trump Jr., who is just saying, keep Trumpism right as it is. Yeah. And then you'll have somebody who's very establishment, who will be like, go back, who will go back to, the old ways, running in as well. And you'll have other people who are somewhere in between in the mix, like Nikki Haley or like Ted Cruz or these kinds of people. Right. And so I think we won't know what the future of the GOP is going to be until that happens. And that battle of ideas is going to determine the future of the Republican Party. And I hope it's one that adopts the best parts of Trumpism, which is restrained America first foreign policy, not nation building and blowing up random countries, kind of social moderation on things, and kind of appealing to a broader spectrum of people. But then the GOP needs to go back to its roots on kind of character and principled economics and rebutting socialism, whereas Trump is all over the place. Sometimes he does that. Sometimes he does government stuff of his own that doesn't work, like tariffs. So I would like to see the GOP kind of return to its fiscally conservative roots to fight the rising of socialism, but keep the best parts of Trumpism with hopefully maybe a slightly less erratic face.
That would be good. That would be good. Very finally, I just wanted to talk a little bit about soccer, because we discussed about it last time, that we're going to talk a little bit of soccer. So we have about 5 to 10 minutes that I want to dedicate a little bit to soccer talk. So as people might know, you are a Chelsea fan, sadly, which somebody has to be, right? And but what was funny about Chelsea is that they spent all of this money to sign all of these players, and for a couple of weeks, it took them a little while to, I think, get everybody working together. But now it really does seem like the chemistry is starting to work out, right?
Right. I think it was always unrealistic to think that just because they broke the bank on a ton of new signings, that it would immediately click, especially because the players like Kai Havertz were so young, and even Timo Werner, they're so young and inexperienced. It is starting to click now, though. But also, what else has changed since the beginning of the season? Our goalkeeper situation, right? It really undermined the entire
You actually bought
team
one. Yeah.
to have Kepa Arrizabalaga in net when he's just, I don't know what's wrong with him, but he's just totally lost it. He can't play at even an elementary level of professional competence these days. And it was just like, you never know how many errors this game, 1, 2, 3, it unsettled the whole team. It unsettled the whole defense. So having Mendy come in, a solid, good goalie, he's only let in a couple goals in like 7 games so far. And then also having Thiago Silva, who I don't know how he is. He's a legend. He's a giant, man. Like, he is so old. He's like 36 now, but he doesn't look like it, and he doesn't play like it. He has come in, and he is class, and he has shored up that defense. So with all the attacking talent that we had, I always knew if we could shore up the leaky back end and get out the weak points, that we were going to have a special side. And that's why I really think, honestly, that a title shout is within a title challenge is within a shout, frankly.
As much as it pains me to say so, I kind of have to agree, because, and this is a very weird Premier League season, because there are no weak teams really anymore. Maybe apart from like 2 or 3, there aren't really
like
any
Sheffield, maybe, but
right, maybe Sheffield, maybe like a Burnley, but other than that, any team can beat any team at this point in the Premier League. I don't think the Premier League has ever been this competitive as it is this season. Because you have a team like Aston Villa that can go and whoop Liverpool, that can go and whoop Arsenal, and Southampton can beat Aston Villa. Southampton's beating all these big teams, so it's a very competitive league, and so it is really hard to predict who the Premier League winner is going to be, because I think whoever the Premier League winner is going to be is going to lose a fair share of their games.
Right. I mean, this is why I love the Premier League. I have some friends who like La Liga, and I'm like, yeah, it's cool, but there's only a couple teams that are really way above the rest.
Exactly.
The Premier League has always been the most competitive by far, but now it is more than ever. I mean, look at Everton. Everton are a class team now, and on their day, they can beat anyone. Yeah. Like you said, Aston Villa with Ross Barkley, who I am a big fan of. Yeah. They look good now too. And also we think
deadly, dude. That Aston Villa front four is incredible.
It's crazy good, man. But also think of like Leicester City, and you have all these top class teams that aren't even in the traditional Big Six. Yet that Big Six, aside from Arsenal, which is shite, are all still good. I mean, Man City's still good, Liverpool's still good, Chelsea's still good, Man United's still good, Tottenham is still fine, I guess.
United, I feel like United and Arsenal are kind of in the same boat, where it's very start-stop. I think Arsenal's season's been very start-stop. United's season's been very start-stop. They look very good against RB Leipzig, and then they go and lose to some Crystal Palace. Same with Arsenal. They look fantastic against United, and then they get their ass whooped 3-0 by Aston Villa. And I'm just like, what am I, I want to support my team. I want to watch. I enjoy soccer, but Arsenal makes it so goddamn difficult to enjoy the sport of football.
Yeah. I will, but I say just watching Arsenal, I'm just always struck by how bad you guys are on the transfer market. Like, everyone thought that Willian was a good signing. Listen, I like Willian a lot, and
his numbers last season, though. Like, if you look at his numbers last season, they're pretty fantastic.
So, but here's the thing: you guys gave him a 3-year deal, right?
Stupid. Yeah.
That's stupid. I mean, and he played well the first couple games for you guys. But the thing about Willian, he's always been super inconsistent,
right?
And like, he's only going to get more inconsistent. So he's basically been kind of a nothing burger, like a passenger in the last few games. And it's like, you guys just don't do well on the transfer market these days. And I also am always struck by just like, I don't know, it's got to be something about the club. When I watch Arsenal, I see all these talented players, but I always never see a winning mentality or fight. Yeah. And I don't know how you fix that, but.
Well, I thought one of the things that Arteta did really well, and we have to give a little bit of a disclaimer whenever talking about Arteta, because it is literally his first ever job. Like, this is his first ever job. So it was obviously a huge gamble giving a job like that to somebody like Arteta, even though he comes extremely highly rated and all of that fun stuff.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I did think he did well is he did install a little bit of a fighting mentality. Like last season after the restart, I think Arsenal had a bit of teeth to them. They had a little bit of a spine to them. They were ready. They were up for games. They were ready to fight. Like if you look at their results against some of the bigger teams, they've actually done fairly well as compared to the last, say, 10 years, right? And so what he's been able to do is he's been able to instill a little bit of a fighting attitude. He's been able to shore up the defense. Like Aston Villa was an anomaly in Arteta's reign in the sense that they were so shambolic defensively. But generally speaking, Arteta's team has been pretty solid defensively, which is something that was unheard of at Arsenal FC. Like being able to defend was completely unheard of. Nobody knew how to do that. But but then they've addressed it to an extent. They've also signed players like Gabriel and Thomas Partey that I think have been very good signings. And we need to make more signings like that and less signings like Willian on a 3-year contract where he's going to be in his 3rd year when he's 93 years old, still freaking running around and just falling over. And people have to carry him off the pitch.
Part of it, too, though, is like Project Restart. I agree. Arsenal looked good.
Yeah.
But in this season, it's like, what are Arsenal playing for exactly? Right. It's like if you're Chelsea, you're fighting to be in the top 3, the top 2. You know a title challenge is not totally out of the question.
Yes.
If you're Liverpool, you're fighting. If you're Aston Villa, you're fighting. But it's like Arsenal, it's like I think that the striving every year, will we make 4th place or not? And that never really actually feeling like you're going to win any of the competitions. Yeah. I mean, FA Cup and some things, but like broadly speaking, that seems like the trap of kind of just like repetitive upper mid tabling, where it's like, what are you fighting for this year? Really?
Well, it is like Arsenal's been stuck in the doldrums for like the past 4 years. Like if you look at it, but the goal I think for Arsenal this season was to get into the top 4, get into the Champions League spots, get back into the Champions League, use that money to recruit well, and then obviously make a break for the top 2 potentially. So that was the goal. The goal this year was to get into the top 4 and then challenge for the Premier League by making some smart signings. And that's going to be the real challenge. Like, are they able to use the transfer market? Because obviously Arsenal are not one of those teams like United who have just an ungodly amount of money at their disposal, or like a Chelsea who can just replace their entire team if they want to, which is that, sweet oil money. So you just don't have that kind of money.
That
right?
Russia money.
Yeah, that Russia money. That's some Russian interference right there, if you want to see one. So Arsenal doesn't have that kind of money. So they need to utilize the money that they have really, really well, and they really haven't done that. And even this year, made a couple of really good signings. I think Here we are. I think it was my. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yo, my internet just.
You messed it up, not me. Blame him, y'all.
It was me. It was me. That was me. That was totally me. My internet crapped itself. So, yeah. So basically, with Arsenal, the problem has been recruiting. The problem has been like contracts. And if you look at Arsenal over the past 2 or 3 years, there's been like an immense amount of turmoil behind the scenes as well and on the pitch. Like we've gone through 3 managers in the last 3 years. The back room staff, like the board staff, like there's a completely new board staff, and a lot of people have left the club in the last 2 or 3 years. So the club's in a huge process of churn at the moment, and one can only hope that it comes out of that process of churn in a stronger position, but there's no indication of that. Even with Arteta, he's starting to show a couple of hints that he's pretty like stubborn in his ideology, which can be a good thing if you look at somebody like Guardiola. Like he's pretty stubborn, but he also is coaching the best players in the world. Arteta is not coaching the best players in the world. He's coaching pretty average players. So stubbornness will only get you this far. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see.
I mean, hope is not a strategy.
No, not for Arsenal. It's not. Nope. Nope. I've been a fan for way too long to understand that hope is not a strategy. It only lets you down. Yeah. So that's Arsenal FC story. Like what I would like Arsenal to be like is more like Liverpool. Look at Liverpool's recruiting in the last 2 or 3 years. It's impeccable. Like the players that they've signed, they saw that somebody like a Sadio Mane or like a Salah are getting into their late 20s, almost into their 30s. And what do? They signed Diogo Jota, basically like for like replacement for either one of them. Jota's a fantastic player. I would take him. Arsenal in a heartbeat.
He's a great
player. Yeah. So that's the kind of recruitment that
Chelsea's recruitment though.
Well, that's the thing again. Like it's great. Obviously, it's great. But then that recruitment sort of more focused on, okay, we bought a team. We don't like this team. Let's go buy another team. You know what I mean? That's not really realistic for a large majority of the Premier League clubs.
Why don't you just get a Russian daddy?
No, I would love a Russian. We had one. We kind of had one. But then we had this American daddy that did not want to be a co-parent with the Russian daddy. So the Russian daddy. Guess where the Russian daddy went? He went to Everton, and now look at Everton.
See, you could have had James if you just had a Russian daddy.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Our American daddy just does not want to spend any money. He wants to build the LA Rams a $5 billion stadium, but he doesn't want to give us a couple of $1 million out of that. I know, right? Tell me about it. Sucks. So, well, we'll see. We'll see how it turns out once the Premier League season starts. That's a good shout. You know, the top 2 shout for Chelsea is actually not a bad shout. What do you think the top 4 is going to be? Final question.
Ooh, Liverpool, Chelsea, Man City, and Leicester.
Leicester?
Yeah, I think they've got it.
That's a good shout, actually. That's not bad. Leicester. Yeah, that's a good shout. I would go Liverpool, City. I'll go with Chelsea. And, yeah, who? I don't think Arsenal are, not on this form for sure. Arsenal are not going to end up in 4th. But, you know, it could be Leicester. If Vardy stays injury-free, it could well be Leicester because they have a really well-balanced team. And they've signed that Fofana guy, so their defense is looking better now. So they've got Soyuncu and Fofana now. That's a good shout.
Yeah,
that's a good shout. That's a good shout. All right, well, let's see how it plays out. But again, dude, this was fun. Let's do this again sometime.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. And
finally,
you
have a podcast, Brad Polumbo. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so everybody, I've got a YouTube channel myself. You just search Brad Polumbo, or I think Sham threw the link in the description. Yes, you can check out and sub. But I'm just doing weekly interviews based on with top people from U.S. politics, you know, about the big things that are going on, kind of a little bit zoomed out, but about the big picture. So kind of the big policy questions and debates and elections and all this. So I've had U.S. senators, I've got congressmen coming up. So if you want to stay in the know on U.S. politics in a right-of-center way, definitely check out my show. It's on YouTube for Brad Polumbo, but also on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. It's Breaking Boundaries with Brad Polumbo.
Awesome. Well, there it is, guys. Check out the show. It's a great show. I like listening to it. They get a lot of great guests. So check it out when you get the chance and you will not be disappointed. All right, Brad. Thanks a lot for joining me today. This was a lot of fun, and let's try to figure out another one of these in the future. All righty. Well, guys, thank you very much for joining us today. If you like the show, as usual, like, share, subscribe, send us your reviews in the comment section as well. Every little bit helps the show. And we will see you next time. And until then, stay happy, stay healthy, and we'll see you guys soon.